Hey, it's Big T. Welcome back to an introduction into fly tying. In our third lesson here, we're going to learn how to apply dubbing to the thread to create a body for a waltz worm that we'll be tying today. That will be the fundamental we're learning, dubbing. So what we're going to do, as you know, the first episode we talked about tools. Last episode we tied a San Juan worm, which involved beginning our thread on the hook and then wrapping the thread down in consecutive touching turns to create a thread base, a pinch wrap, and then we also used a tool to do a half hitch to finish knot on the fly. So hopefully you guys that are following along were able to tie that fly, hopefully fished it. Please comment if you caught a fly on that or caught a fish on that fly. That'd be wonderful. So today we're going to do a waltz worm, which will involve learning how to apply dubbing to our thread. We're going to start out with a size 12 2X nymph hook. If you notice, I'm going to apply that in the vise this way, and I carry these in my shop. They're great hooks. Very durable, strong, good point. But you can use any brand on this fly. And you can tie these flies from, heck, a 10 to a 20 in the size variation. This is a good size to start out with when you're tying. We're going to add a bead to this fly. Some people do not tie beads into their flies and just fish with split shot. Others do. There's pros and cons. I prefer beads personally. So let's talk about beads for just a second. Two main types as far as materials are concerned, maybe three. Glass beads, they generally don't make in a bunch of sizes, but are good for smaller flies, don't have a lot of weight. You've got your brass beads, which was the traditional method of tying beads into flies for many years, and then we added tungsten beads, and tungsten is a heavy metal, weighs more than lead, so you can actually incorporate tungsten beads into your flies and not have to use split shot during the course of your fishing if you choose to, which is my preferred method. So I'm going to use a tungsten 3.3 millimeter bead for this particular application. They come in different sizes. You can find charts to size accordingly. They also come in two main styles, which would be your slotted beads or your countersunk beads. Countersunk beads are for most hooks. Slotted beads, generally we're going to apply to a jig hook. A jig hook has a downturn up towards the eye of the hook. The slotted bead fits over that, and that allows the fly, generally the principle is to ride hook point up so that you're not getting hung quite as much on the floor. So several ways we can apply the bead to the hook. You can actually put the bead in your palm, hook through the small hole portion of the bead, not the big hole on the countersunk. I prefer using a bead tweezer, which will hold the bead here. I've got my hook situated in that manner where the eye is up, hook point's coming up, and I just slide the bead down that way. Then I can transfer it back to our traditional placement in the vise and catch it at the bottom or hook bend, leaving the top shank exposed. I know that I talked about using black thread in my prior video and the list of materials we would be needing. I'm going to change that up on the fly that I'm tying because I think it might be a little bit more visible, but it's also going to show you how you can create a hot spot on a fly, which is an attractor. So I'm going to actually use some fire orange thread on this, but again, you could use any color you really would like to. Traditionally, black is the color. So again, applying the thread, we've got our less dominant left hand. If you're right-handed towards me, your right hand and bobbin are on the other side of the fly and hook. And we're going to begin wrapping backwards, consecutive touching turns, covering this tag of thread before trimming. We'll continue to wrap backwards and get a good thread base right down to the end or bend of the hook. Now, if you wanted to apply a tail, this would be the perfect opportunity to do that. You could use pheasant tail, you could use coq de leon, in which case we'll go through this probably the next video. I'll show you how to measure that material and put the tail on. So for now, we're just going to leave it as is. Fish eat flies without tails all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a dubbing. This is just something that I actually mixed up. Find just a decent hare's ear, something simple as far as dubbing. When we look at different dubbings, you've got your natural hair, you've got synthetics, you've got everything in between, blends of both. Some are easy to apply, some are more difficult and don't want to cooperate. One thing that you can use is something called a dubbing wax, and this is just a tacky substance that you can apply to your thread prior to putting your dubbing on. I don't prefer to do that because most of the flies that I have and use that have dubbing on them, the majority are nymphs. I find that wax can inhibit the sink rate of those flies, so I tend to avoid it if possible. However, feel free if you need to use it, especially starting out, use a dubbing wax. Synthetics have a tendency to be a little more difficult, or coarse hairs have a tendency to be a little bit more difficult, but there's millions of dubbings on the market. Generally, the rabbit fur or hare's ears are a good place to start and a little bit easier to apply. The biggest mistake I see in initial tires with respect to dubbing is applying too much. That's just going to happen most likely. Understand that you do not need very much of this in order to create a fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a little bit of thread out. I'm going to take a very small pinch. I mean, there's hardly anything on there at all. Hopefully that'll show up. And I am going to put that on the thread, and with my thumb and pointer finger, I'm going to roll in that manner. And I'm going to roll that dubbing onto the thread. It may not show up because I have it so thin to begin with. That's called a dubbing noodle. So we've got a little bit of a noodle on our thread right now. I can actually slide that noodle up and put it right to the back of the thread where I want it and where I want to start applying that. So I'm going to continue to do this, and generally there's two ways. Most flies, we like to taper a body, and by taper I mean being skinnier at the back and a little thicker at the top. You can do that by simply wrapping your material. If I had a uniform amount of dubbing on my entire thread, dubbing noodle was the same size all the way across, I could make more turns up top to build the bulk up. Or the other way, and something that I've just learned to do, is to add a little bit more dubbing on my noodle and make it slightly thicker as I progress down the thread. This is going to be a situation where time and practice really gets you where you want to be as far as how much do I apply without over applying and having too much material left over, etc. I will say you can always add. It's a little harder to take the dubbing off the thread once you've got it on there. So I've applied and made a dubbing noodle. In this case, I've started really skinny and added a little bit more as I've gone down my thread, and it's time to wrap. Simply wrap this just like you would your thread with consecutive turns, touching turns, and we're going to wrap this up the hook shank, creating a tapered body. Now, if you notice, I'm pretty much there, but I got a little bit of a gap. I would probably add just a touch more to this. Again, you can slide that up in order to get that tightened up. Now, what I'm doing at this point is I'm going to wrap this thread several times around and create what's called a hot spot. So now you can see the orange thread just behind the bead, and then we have our body. Okay, now it's time to finish the fly with a half hitch. We're using half hitches just because I find it easy to teach. You can find videos on your whip finishing. I'm using a little bit larger half hitch tool because I've got to go over top that bead. And by larger, I mean the diameter of the hole. Again, you could use a ballpoint pen or find other items that will do the same thing. And as we discussed last time, we're just wrapping that thread around the half hitch tool twice, putting it over top the bead, and bringing the thread back over top so it creates a knot. This is a waltz worm with an orange hot spot in my case. The last thing I'm going to show you, if I can find it, there's one more tool, and this is not needed, and this is also something you can make, called a there it is, a dubbing brush. You can actually, if you wanted this fly to look a little buggier or spikier, you can brush out that dubbing. This is something I made. On one side it's got some Velcro. On the, I believe it was a gun cleaning tool. But toothbrushes, other things, anything that just is going to pick some of those fibers out are worthwhile. So here's our waltz worm. Now you got a San Juan worm, a waltz worm. Go fish, catch some fish on the flies that you've tied. Next week or next episode, it probably will be a few days, we're going to learn how to apply a tail to this fly. We're also going to learn how to wrap a ribbing around the fly. And I think I'm also going to tackle a soft hackle, adding a top feather to this fly in front, all in one episode, to try and get you a couple more fundamentals down in this. So we'll keep progressing. The following week we'll be doing, I believe we're going to do a woolly booger, and I'll teach you how to palmer a feather on. So we're progressing nicely. It shouldn't be but a handful more episodes before you guys ought to be able to take off and tie just about anything you want. Appreciate you watching. For any of the materials you need, please, and other tips and informational videos, visit bigtflyfishing.com, and please subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much.